All right. So Genesis chapter 12, we have moved out of the like mythological beginnings of the world, and now we're into family history and the story of Abram. And boy, oh boy, it doesn't take long for things to get messy and a little bit strange. So just to connect the dots from where we were last time, and then then we're gonna just jump into to the beginning of 12, because there's a lot of important information in the first half of 12, and then the drama starts on the second half. So in chapter 11, it ends with the whole like the list of the lineage, and this person had this person and this person had this person, and it connects us from Noah through to Terah, who is the father of Abraham. And we have Terah taking the family, including Abram and his nephew Lot, because Abram's brother passes away, so he's kind of taking in Lot as almost his own son. And they take off from Ur in Chaldea, and they carry on, and then Terah dies, which makes Abram the patriarch. So Abram is officially the head of the house and the head of the whole group of people that they're traveling with. And so that's where we pick up in 12, which is interesting because we already see them take off from Chaldea. And then the first thing we have in chapter 12 is the initial covenant between Abram and God, where God is saying, go. From where you are right now, you're gonna leave here too. So this is where I kind of want to start of like, what's on the table here? Because this is God is talking directly to Abram. He's telling him to do things, and he's asking him for some things. What are the two ends of the bargain here?
Well, God's going to make him a great nation.
Yeah.
He's going to have his name great and everything. He's going to be a famous person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for God. He's going to bless you, and he's going to curse the people that he doesn't like, that are bad. And so it looks like Abram's got a wonderful future. But I always wondered, why did he leave there? I know God asked him to, but what was wrong with Ur?
We're gonna put a pin in that. Let's talk about a few of a little bit more of like what's on God's end of the bargain. But I like that question. Why did they leave in the first place?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna write that down so we can come back to it. So what are some of the other things God is promising? What are some of the details in this promise?
Look, it seems to me that God is really going to be in this corner. I mean, it's going to be, you're my favorite one. This is a theme. He's always picking a favored one. Mm-hmm. And a favored one, and I will bless you and all your descendants and curse those who don't treat you right. So it's really significant. And
that last sentence is really quite something. It says, and by you, all the families of the earth shall bless themselves. Everybody. So, wow.
Through you.
Yeah. Everybody.
Yeah.
And the other book we're reading, I just happened to look at this morning. I started reading it anyway. It said that the Chaldeans were famous for being astrologers and astronomers. So they believed that the stars were in control of things as opposed to a single God. So Abram did not, at least they think he did not believe that way the others did, and that was one of the reasons he was picked.
Interesting. Yeah, this is the similar region that you will eventually get the idea of magicians and magi. The magi come from this region. We just know linguistically through the development of the words, the idea of zodiac is also from this region that gets brought over. So like there's connections throughout the story of going back to this general area. And so, but the theme you all picked out there of like God kind of choosing a favorite is, yeah, that starts here. I mean, it kind of started with Noah. Noah, there seemed to be a little bit more of a like an explanation of why Noah versus any of the other people, because it kind of said like everyone else is bad, Noah good, we're gonna save Noah. And then God's like, I'm not gonna do that anymore. But we see here, it still seems like God is choosing at least a favorite. We don't know what else God is doing, but there's this thing of like, I'm gonna bless the whole world, but I'm gonna do it with you as my tool. You are blessed to be a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
So what's on Abram's side of the bargain?
Well, he did what God said. He went.
Yeah, the command is go.
Yeah, and he
He
did.
went.
Be fruitful and multiply.
So right, like Abram's part of the bargain here is you have to go. Like if you stay in place, you're not going to have these promises. You have to take all of your people and you have to go. That is your end of the bargain right now. You go, and as you go, you are going to be blessed, but you also have the responsibility of like there's also in that kind of like, yes, you are going to be blessed, Abram, but you have to be a blessing where you go. Mary Ellen, yeah.
In verse 2 or 3 right here, no, verse 1, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. But he sure takes a lot of people with him when he's told to leave your kindred and your father's house. So that confused me.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about it. How many people is Abram traveling with?
He with us. Yeah. How many went?
And what does it mean to leave your father's house? Because he's like in a more tradition, in like the family that we're thinking of, Abram doesn't like leave his like father's house. In some ways, or in our more modern sense, he replaces his father. He is now patriarch and he takes everyone with him. So the thing is, kind of like you have to somewhat read between the lines, because this is one of the things that people assume you know how big these caravans are, just because the people reading these stories, they see the shepherds, they know, like if you count how many sheep, you kind of understand how many people you need to work them. So that's where we have to do the math to kind of backtrack. Abram is kind of in like, yes, he's the head of a family, but he is running not even a small business. He's running a business. And so the patriarch thing, he's not the one tending the animals necessarily. We'll get to later on, and we'll discuss his grandchildren, because they do deal with the sheep on hand. Abram is not at all. He is a business person. So he has to deal both with managing how the flock is getting fed, which means he's the one with the map who has to know where the resources are, which is why he has to know where they're moving. But the thing is, there's shepherds and herdsmen who are the ones who are managing the flock themselves. So he has to have these employees that there's kind of this blurry line, because they're not really employees. They're servants, which technically means Abram owns these people. When Abram says go, they can't exactly say no, but it's also, when we think of like owning people, we in our American context think of chattel slavery, and it's not that dramatic. Chattel slavery is a category unto itself of just like horror and terribleness, but Abram does own these people. He would have had female servants. He would have had cooks. He would have had all of these people taking care of the different things. Think of him more as a nomadic lord. He doesn't have land, but he owns all these people. And yeah, he's not leaving them behind because he doesn't want to be destitute. His wealth is in his animals, and he has to own enough people to take care of his animals. And it works as a business. You have to know where to go, because they often, you would have these relationships between the people who are sedentary and farm versus the nomadic people who raise cattle. You have to be able to have relationships between them because you want the crops and they want the meat. So you do exchanges, and that's where Abram's the business person. So he is almost the CEO of Abraham Incorporated, this business that he's running. So yes, God is actually not asking him to leave the business that he's running behind. What he's asking is to leave. When they say the house of your father, they're not talking about Terah. They're talking about the genealogy that we just went through. The fathers, all of the patriarchs ahead of it. Because like, while we have this like one thread of the genealogy that we followed, all of the people that also branch off, and these are massive families, are considered part of the family because they had a much bigger understanding of that. You have to take care of your own. And so that's like when there's orphans and widows, they are supposed to be passed through these genealogy, and someone in the family has to take care of them, but the families are huge. And so basically it's saying leave the entire support network behind. It's not saying leave the business behind, it's the big support network that God's asking them to leave. And then leaving the land. So yes, there is like a relationship between the ground they're actually walking on. This is also a little bit complicated from our modern perspective because we think of land as private property. We think like in our world, especially in the USA, even if there's like a field or something is just like undeveloped, someone owns it. There's someone with a piece of paper that says like, this is mine. That just does not exist at all. And there's a lot of land that's held in common. So this is also one of those where you're leaving behind your bank of knowledge for these animals of like when what pasture is going to go green. So you have to know when to hit what spot, when what area is going to have water, because watering holes dry up. So you have to have this understanding of where to go. So leaving the land is almost leaving your understanding of where to go to get resources. So it's less of you own the land and more like you have to leave both your support network to help you survive, and you have to at the same time leave your understanding of how to survive in that area. So go take your entire small business elsewhere where you don't know where the watering holes are and you don't know when it's going to go green. You have to build new networks and new relationships. You have to found relationships of trade and understanding, and you're going to have to interact with a lot more people. You have to create that from scratch. So you see that this move has to be very relational because he's being asked to establish an entire new network, which is why part of the thing is you will be blessed to be a blessing. You have to make a new network, but as you make a new network, I will work through you to affect the rest of the world. So how does that change the picture of what's being asked of him?
Yeah.
It's a big thing.
Yeah.
What does it say about how many people went with him?
I tried to look this up. I couldn't find anyone who had actually done the calculations. There's a lot of people. That's all I can say. Did I find a picture? Okay, now granted, we are relying on our artistic interpretation here.
Okay.
But this is one interpretation that was actually somewhat, I clicked on the article and they discussed a little bit more of the details of it. But you
Yeah.
see, there's a lot of people here.
Yeah.
I mean, so part of this also, so I mean, we talk about like the animals, like someone has to be an expert in camels, someone has to be an expert in sheep. There would be like, you have to have all these people that have these well-developed skills. But the other part is they have to set up camp. And I guarantee you, Abraham is not setting up his own tent. He
Yeah.
is not that person. He has other things to do. He is making business deals. So he also has to have the people who know how to set up his living space on the road, because they're nomadic. They set up camp we still have somewhat of an image of this. So they would have collapsible living spaces, but someone has to set it up. Someone has to cook the food. Someone has to cook the food, not just for Abram, who gets the fancy food, but all the other people. He might have a small village with him. There's another one. Let's see. Can I get some more artistic representations?
I was assumed he was kind of a simple man.
No. Abraham is wealthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your explanation of it, though, that God tells Abraham, you're going to bless the whole world. You're going to have a whole new set of people. But your explanation that Abraham didn't have to have a lot of people. He's got to have enough people with him to take care of himself, but he doesn't have to move everybody. And God is going to work through him then in order to do this grand educational thing that's going to happen when he finally gets to the promised land.
Right. So here's some other interesting dynamics. Yeah, like theoretically, there's a lot of people with Abram. Like he's already a moving village in a sense. Like there's already a lot of people that he's technically the father of. But there's one key problem. Like lords and ladies, and not unlike royalty, you need an heir. You need someone who is going to replace you. And Abraham's story is famous for, like, he needs someone that has his name. They are very fixated on him being an actual father. And having an heir to carry on the business. And for all the people he owns, it disappears if he doesn't have someone to replace him who is of the bloodline. So they're still very concerned of him being a father, and we will see it in play a lot to come.
So what about his harem? Doesn't he have a harem that he could pick from to get a...
We will get to that. We will get there. There's a lot of dynamics on that one. There's one phrase I did look at. So Abraham did what he told. So in verse 5, we see that Abram took his wife Sarai, his brother's son Lot. Also note, for however many people Abram has, Lot has his own inheritance because he's the patriarch in place of his brother's line of the family. Lot also has his own group of people that goes with him. That kind of Abraham has under his wing, but it is its own separate little small business. It would be a smaller group because he's not the main patriarch. But there's also a gaggle of people there. All the possessions that they had and the people that they had acquired in Haran. So you see in verse 5 that they had acquired people. Whether that means they bought more people to take care of their increasing wealth. I looked up this word. This was in some of the articles I was reading when I was trying to figure out how many people are with Abraham here. The term they used is begot, which actually implies that the people that Abraham owns there's enough there that people are marrying and having families which is part of the business. You need the people that you own to also be married and also have kids, to also be brought up in the family business. So he has enough people that his people are marrying each other and having kids. If that also shows you the amount of people he has. It's enough that there's enough people to take partners unto themselves.
We're talking hundreds here.
Yeah.
You know, and just moving a single family from one place to another is a massive undertaking. Moving 100 or more, I can't even fathom the logistics of the supply wagons they needed to bring food for the trip. And I mean, this is unbelievable undertaking.
Yeah, but nomads have been doing it for years. They're good at it.
Yeah, that is the one thing, is like, yes, these people very much have chosen a herder nomadic life. This is very much still like a very viable way of living. However, Abram's still doing something kind of strange. Nomads normally aren't just like traveling anywhere. They normally have a route. They were like the original merchants and trade people, that they would be the ones traveling from town to town, and you would like, the herds people would show up like every April, because that's when the water was good in the area. And then you would get the sheep from the herds people in April per se. So they normally had routes. And so this one, Abram's basically being told, make a new route. We're going to try something new, which is also in some ways very human. One of the articles I read recently, or no, I guess it was like a year ago, they found the remains of red-headed Celts in Eastern China. Evidently the Celtic people did a similar thing to Abram and made it all the way to China, and they had tartan and red hair, which is why they knew like something's weird here. So it's both human and it's a big risk, because trying to make sure that you have enough food and water for 100 people as you're charting a new path, that's a thing. But it also, the thing that I was tempted to do that I did not do is like, how long does it take to walk this route? And I don't think that's fair, because they're also moving animals while they're doing it. So we don't exactly have a timetable. But I did look up a map just so you can get an idea. So over here in is where they start. So Abram's father takes him from down here at like the delta area of the Tigris and the Euphrates, all the way up here to Haran, which is where our story today starts, is up here, which is on the border of Syria and Turkey. And so the little lines here are established routes. So they're not just like trekking across unknown territory. They are following roads, but they still don't know what they're going to find. So they are making their way down through Cana, and then will end up in Egypt by the end of our story. Just note that there's like a little green hue here. That is literally why they call it the Fertile Crescent, but it's partially because there's a row of mountains here, and then there's desert beyond the mountain. So that's why they go up and over. That's like a simplification where you can kind of see the route a little clearer. Whoop, come on, toolbar, go away. Give me just a moment. I did want to look up a maps just so you could see some like modern overlay of the world that we know, that they started on the very eastern side of Iraq, up through Syria, just dotting into Turkey, and then kind of making their way through Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, Syria.
Wow.
Long ways.
Mm-hmm. Long ways.
Now with the
It's
fertile,
really little.
What? I heard a
Israel is little.
the modern state of Israel is only the size of New Jersey, if that gives you a size comparison. But I heard another voice for a question. Was that you, Mary Ellen?
Yeah, I was asking, in the previous slide, you were, it showed the Fertile Crescent was what they were following.
Yeah.
And was the Fertile Crescent actually, I don't want to say lush, but not desert? Obviously, they were avoiding the desert, but traveling through the Fertile Crescent, could they have counted on food resources on their way, wild grains or wild animals for food?
Yeah.
I see them going through the desert, and this kind of changes what I'm thinking, knowing it's the Fertile Crescent.
Mm-hmm. So that is a wonderful question, because there are a few factors that make this area very different in our modern world. Because yeah, when we think of this area, we think of like sand dunes, and I'm gonna take this off screen share so I can look at you all. I feel like our modern image is like sandstone buildings and heat waves and just the very barren landscape. To give you a little bit of a mental image. So today, northern Israel, like Galilee area, looks like Northern California. That's kind of the terrain. I haven't been much farther north than that. I haven't traveled in that area, and even seeing like videos of what the land looks like in Iraq, it's still, I mean, we called the war we had there Desert Storm. So we have that kind of deserty mental image. At the point in time where these stories are taking place, the actual key difference is that it's much closer to the Ice Age. In the Ice Age was when this area was much, much more lush. Even like parts of, I mean, well, there is a lot more greenery even in like the Sahara Desert was smaller. I don't want to say it was like not still a desert, but the desert region was smaller. The Fertile Crescent was much more lush. So yes, there was a lot more life. This area has slowly desertified, both as we have come out of the Ice Age, is one thing that kind of dried out that area. The other thing, which is a major problem today, is over farming has had desertification effects. So with like industrial farming practices, more traditional agriculture didn't do it as much, but the moment that we did more monoculture, brought in machines, it dried out the soil and the topsoil blew away. So there's more desert today, specifically because of modern farming practices. And it's actually a big deal of how to like reverse that process. Yeah, Larry.
In current time then, when are you putting Abraham? Like 2000 BCE or where?
This is the issue once again, because it's like when is the story written and when's the story about? So when the story is written, it's like very far after the Ice Age.
Yeah, far around. Yeah.
When he may have actually lived, it is close. It's closer enough to maybe have made a difference. Either way, this area is a lot greener than we think of.
Okay.
So yes, there's likely some wild grains. The practice of foraging like just native plants we have almost forgotten how much we used to do that. And I mean, we even have edible plants in our front yard that we think are weeds, but people used to eat them. We just didn't talk about those harvesting practices. So 100% they're gathering food as they're going along, which is likely part of their practice because they are nomadic people. So yeah, this area is green. Don't think of like Desert Storm. There's a variety of factors that has made it more desertified today. But that actually, that's a good segue into verse 10. The one side note I'm going to make is that, actually, before hold on to the desertification. Is there food? Because that comes up in the second half. I do want to 7, 8, and 9 are actually key things. So we have Abram set out. He has this project, and we see that he actually makes the journey. We're not given a time scale of how many years or anything, but they come to the land. And in verse 6, it says the Canaanites were in the land at the time. So they're not going to an empty place. There are people here. And we've already gotten, because of the story of Noah, we already have an idea of who the Canaanites are, because what we see is various times we've gotten an oral history that the Canaanites come from a violent descendant of the world. So you're kind of already set up to think like, these are angry, aggressive people. This is not going to be a fun thing. But Abraham kind of just shows up, and God gives the last part of the initial covenant. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. So it's not to you, Abram, but it's to your offspring.
Mhm.
Which he doesn't have at this point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's not to like your small business. It's not to your servants. It's to your offspring. But what's interesting is Abram doesn't stop. It's not like he settles down there. He builds an altar and keeps going.
Mhm.
He's not like, once again, we're not really given a good reason of why he keeps going, but he doesn't settle down there. He's not like, okay, here we are. Great. Let's start making some networks. They carry on. And they actually set up a second altar at another place. These altars actually come up later in the story. This is one where I will always need the notes because my memory is not the best. But some of the altars that we will see later in this book and later in other books, it will have the same name. And so these are kind of, there's a question of, is Abram setting up this shrine? Or is Abram attributed to set up the shrine that people actually know about? Because these are likely places that what they find is that often in these kind of societies, that locations for shrines are set up, and when the local gods change, they will change the notion and the story around the shrine. And so just some places get established as holy places, and then they're carried on, and when the culture changes, they keep the location but change the name. It's fascinating, but that's archaeology. These sites existed probably still, and so they would have known some of these shrines that Abraham sets up. And so he's pitching his tents, he keeps going, and invokes the name of the Lord, and Abraham journeyed by stages towards the Negev, which is in the Egypt area. So I'm going to pause there. The key thing to remember, and this is how I've always had it explained to me, both in undergrad and graduate. We have the 3 parts of God's promise to Abram already set up. And the rest of much of the story of Israel, like the rest of the Old Testament, is actually the interplay of 3 things. God promises Abram descendants, land, and a blessing.
What?
Descendants, land, and a blessing. Be
Right.
blessed. We already have that you will be a great nation, which is the promise of descendants. You are blessed to be a blessing. And in verse 7, we have, you will have this land. So at various points, it's at this point in the story, Abram has the blessing. He doesn't have descendants and he doesn't have land. And so keep these 3 things in mind of who has what. Do you have descendants? Because normally when they have descendants, they either don't have the blessing or they don't have the land. And this comes into play in politics today, is still the people today want all 3, because these are the 3 promises of Abram. All right. Any other thoughts before we go into family drama here? All right, well, the stage is actually laid here for the rest of Genesis. This, while we have the mythological origin, this is the story of the people of the Hebrew people. Right now, there is no, it's not really appropriate to say the Israelites or the Jewish people or the Judeans. They're kind of, or even the Hebrew people is kind of a loose term because that comes more in Exodus. This is like a family story. So these are the people of Abram, but they become the Hebrew people that become the Israelites. So we can talk about that language a little bit later in the story, but this is the story of Abraham. Everything's at play. And then in verse 10, there's a problem, and that is there's a famine. So there's a famine and they go to Egypt. The question is, why does everyone go to Egypt when there's a famine? Any guesses as to why Egypt?
He
Well, they
got
must
food.
be resources there.
Resources, food. The question is why? Why does Egypt always have food?
The rivers,
The Nile.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Tigris and Euphrates.
Mhm.
So there is a key difference between the Tigris and the Euphrates and the Nile. Both all three rivers have a tendency to flood. Flooding makes great fertile soil. You actually want rivers to flood because it refreshes the topsoil. So people are reliant on these rivers flooding. But there's a difference between the Tigris and Euphrates flooding and the Nile flooding.
Mhm.
The Nile floods like clockwork.
Oh,
It floods on schedule every year. They know when to leave the banks of the Nile because they know when it's going to flood. And it is so predictable. I cannot stress how regular it is known to flood. It floods regularly enough actually that they dammed it because they wanted it to flood twice a year instead of once a year. So we've kind of tampered with it today, but it flooded like clockwork. They knew when it was going to happen. The Tigris and Euphrates, unpredictable, which is why we have a story like the flood that was a storm out of nowhere. The Tigris and Euphrates is erratic. It sometimes floods, sometimes it floods frequently. You don't know when it's coming. And sometimes there is severe drought, which is why you get lots of famines, because that's erratic and the Nile is predictable.
oh,
So the Egyptian people, it's why Egypt is constantly a powerhouse in the ancient world, is because they generally knew when it was going to flood, how much food they had to grow, how much they had to save until it flooded again. They had this science down pat, which means Egypt is notoriously stable because things run like clockwork. You also see this in mythology. Greek mythology, the gods are all over the place. They're petty, they're vindictive, and they think it actually deals with somewhat the weather patterns in that part of Greece. Storms come up out of nowhere, volcanoes and earthquakes, and that area has very erratic natural disasters and storms and floods and all that jazz. Egypt, predictable weather. They know when the rains come regularly, the Nile floods regularly, and you see it predicted or see it in the mythology where their gods are much calmer. And they don't have as much regime overturn. You see dynasties last for centuries
Mhm.
because when natural disasters happen, and if your ruling class is seen as the intermediary between gods, there's not as much uprising because the gods are stable because the weather's stable.
Mhm.
And so when there's famine in other parts of the world, you could reliably go to Egypt, which is why Abram's bringing this small village to the place that always has bread.
Okay.
How did Egypt feel about that? I mean, in the whole world, I mean, I would think they would want to protect themselves.
The thing is, they were power brokers. They were like throughout, or basically through until Rome, Egypt is a sovereign, stable nation. Literally, it's like we talk about Cleopatra and kind of the disintegration of Egypt being a sovereign nation, because it's literally then that is when Egypt loses its status as a power broker, is through till Rome. And so when people come to Egypt saying like, you have food, we don't, they use it as politics. They're like, okay, we'll give you food this time, but guess what? You're gonna like, sometimes Egypt takes over large pieces of the land and you have to pay taxes to them. It's not like, they don't see it as like insecurity. They see it as, oh, you need us. Yeah, you do. And we're gonna make sure you know you need us. So if that little piece of politics explains why Abram's a little bit insecure that he has a pretty wife. So let's talk about the actual story, because this one is weird. So he shows up to town with this small village of people and he looks at his wife evidently and says, you're beautiful. This is going to cause a problem. He's worried he's going to get killed because Sarai is beautiful. Evidently, so we're told. She's so gorgeous. He's worried he's going to lose everything because of her. And he would rather pass her off as his sister and let the Pharaoh take her into his own harem. What do you all think about this? What the heck?
What the heck? It's just another sacrifice.
Well, I guess maybe Yahweh didn't say you have to be good.
Maybe he had a few ugly ones around to take care of.
Yeah. All right, Mary Ellen, I didn't hear you. What'd you say?
Well, if she was so beautiful that the Pharaoh would take her in his harem, she wasn't the same age as Abram. She must have been a whole lot younger. And, you know, that leads me to the procreation that, you know, if she's that much younger, she can actually start having some of his children, but I don't know if the story goes that way or not. So
We actually know their age gap.
Yeah.
She is
and
younger.
There's a certain amount of incongruity here in that the ages of the pharaohs at death, those that have been preserved, are fairly well established. And they live lifetimes like we do. I mean, some of them died young, like Tutankhamun when they were 18 or 19, but some like Ramses II, you know, lived into their 80s or 90s, you know, but nobody lived 850.
So this is one of the times where, once again, we kind of try to calculate how old they are because their behavior does not match their age. I am actually going to take a guess and say Abram and Sarah feel to me like they're middle-aged. Abram is said to be 75. His behavior is not that of a 75-year-old man. But it's also kind of paying attention to what was considered old age for women, into the point where, like, in the ancient world, if I was existing as I am, people would be panicked about my reproduction because I am 30 and don't have kids. There might be problems, but we also know, like, in our own biology that, like, having kids starts to get harder in your like 30 to 40s range. So that's actually my guess of where Sarah is somewhere mid 30s to 40s.
Okay.
Abram's probably not 75. But once again, we can't find a good way to judge how they calculated their age.
Mhm.
This is just one of the things that like, it just plainly doesn't quite make sense. Because some people want to say like, did they count their age by the seasons they lived through? So like, was it like 4 seasons in a year, or like, what would it look like if there was only 3 seasons in a year? But it still doesn't quite add up. I don't think they're as old as they have recorded. That's my own personal opinion. So I don't think Sarah, I think Sarah, when she actually has a kid, is said to be 90, which would put Abram in his hundreds. There is an age gap, but it's not like decades age gap, is my guess. But Sarah's already kind of considered old, but old in other time frames is much different. So
But she's appealing enough as a woman that he would keep her in his harem. And in my recollection, harems are usually young, sometimes girls.
yeah.
And, you know, to take a middle-aged woman into his harem, you know, that's hard for me to imagine.
Yeah, so you're right. Time does elapse between when she actually starts to try to have kids and like right now, yeah, she's probably pretty young here. But Abram, I mean, it's enough that Abram passes her off as his sister. It's like, hey, this is my sister.
He doesn't
Don't
want
kill me. But what's weird is like literally Abram takes so where does it say? The woman was taken into Pharaoh's house, and for her sake, he dealt well with Abram, and he gave her sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female slaves, donkeys, and camels. That's called a dowry. Like literally, the Pharaoh gave Abram a dowry for his wife because he thought it was his sister. So Abram's making money on Sarah.
Yeah, well, Abram can say, another good deal.
How does she feel about all this?
It's a blessing.
Yeah, this is right after the covenant of like, Abram, I'm gonna give you descendants. I'm gonna give you land. You have to be a blessing. I'm gonna bless people through you. And I'm gonna curse people who curse you. And Abram just like immediately pawns his wife for wealth.
Well, you know, God didn't say anything about that, did he?
Right. At this point, Sarah's not in the blessing equation. It's just Abram. So Abram's doing what he thinks is best.
Well, maybe their culture is a little different from ours too. You know, they think, oh, you know, this is okay. You know, this is what we do in our culture. We can do this.
So
No
the
problem.
thing is, how does the Pharaoh respond when all of a sudden it says that the Lord afflicted Pharaoh with plagues? Like God's like, no, you don't, Abram, and like makes the Pharaoh's life hell for a little bit. So evidently, and then it looks like the Pharaoh kind of freaks out and says, dude, why'd you give me your wife? Like, who does that? And Pharaoh's just like, take her back. Like, I don't want your wife. Come on.
But take her back and everything that you've acquired to this point. I mean, instead of punishing Abram for the deception, it gives him back his wife and everything and all the wealth he's accumulated. This doesn't sound like an angry Pharaoh to me at all.
Or just throwing this out there. So yeah, you're completely right. Yeah. Take everything and your money and the dowry. Like, Pharaoh doesn't ask for the dowry back. The one thing I will say though, is if supernatural events are happening because he took some man's wife, he may be like, I'm not messing with your God. Evidently, like, your God is evidently able to mess up my life. Just like, take it and run. I don't want to touch you. I'm just gonna like, you do you, get out of my view.
Yeah.
That could be.
So there are no bad consequences, except there is a drought also in Egypt.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So here's the thing that I didn't pick up till this read through. There is an echo of another story here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Sue, did you pick it up? What does it remind you of?
It's Moses. Yeah.
Right, there's a precursor for the story of the Exodus. Because the original reason why the Hebrew people are in Egypt, it comes at the end of Genesis. That with the 12 brothers and the story of the Technicolor Dreamcoat, Jacob eventually ends up in Egypt and there's a famine, and that's why his brothers go.
Whoa.
And Abraham's entire family, all the descendants and all the everyone will end up in Egypt because of a famine. There are going to be plagues. And then Pharaoh asks them to leave, and they actually get to plunder Egypt before they leave. The people leave with a bunch of wealth because they just take it and run. There is a precursor to Exodus here. So what do you all think about Abram and this weird little story here? We started the study talking about the covenant that God is, or this kind of like bargain God establishes here. And then we have the beginning of some of the family drama, but we kind of have echoes of another story. What's going on with the beginning of this Abraham story? What do you all think?
Well, I think the blessing part of it is coming in here, because Abram lands on his feet, has been through all of, the famine on the land, the long journey to get to this point, and except for Sarah's part of this, which as a woman I think she was misused, but Abram lands on his feet. So, I think the blessing part of the covenant is exemplified here.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It doesn't say anything about how Sarah felt about it, does it? Women didn't have thoughts about those things. I mean, she might have thought it was really cool, so.
Depends how much she likes Abram.
Right. But why would she like him if he gives her away?
Oof. And I hate to give you a precursor. This won't be the last time he does this.
Yes. Oh, right. Okay.
I think it has to do with their culture. I don't think that they thought that was wrong. That was just what they did to solve the problems they had.
Mhm.
And it was probably necessary in their thoughts and their culture.
I think he was wrong because
There are still cultures on earth now where it's, if a stranger comes in to your house, you offer him not only the use of his facilities, but the use of his wife as well. Where, in certain areas that I think that's still excellent, particularly northern climates where it's very cold at night.
yeah. Stay warm.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to bring up because we have modern notions of monogamy and
Yeah.
marrying for love, and marriage is business deals. Like, we're going to see a lot of business deals happen, and just remember, marriage is business. Marriage is not love these days. I mean, you could have love. It's actually pointed out when two people do love each other because it's not a given. And it's kind of nice to see it kind of say, like, when two people like being married, but marriage is business deals. Monogamy is not the same idea. The one that the one tradition that I do know of is the Inuit cultures have different practices where there's like a season where you basically get to switch up spousal relations for a little bit. And it actually provides cultural cohesion. There's reasons for it. So there's both rules around it and there's reasons why they do it. But yeah, we don't quite know all of the marriage habits and kind of some of the cultural boundaries. But we do see that there's a little bit where, yeah, Abram gets away scot-free with this one, but there's still just like Pharaoh's kind of not happy with the situation or like giving it back. He seems to have some sort of reaction to say like this may be maybe not as taboo as today, but it does seem to still somewhat be in the like this isn't okay, dude, kind of territory.
Well,
Like
he's-
there's a norm being broken, it
Mhm,
seems.
mhm.
Well, maybe he thought she was a virgin and, you know, it was something new. It was his. She'd
Mhm.
already been used up, so they didn't want her, you know. So,
That will also come into play of purity politics, and because women are property, and that's one thing that is very clear and is, I think, should make us uncomfortable, is a lot of these dynamics you have to remember. We will see women assert agency, and we're going to have some hard discussions with some very uncomfortable stories that come up. It's like, where is the agency? But also, women were owned. Women were property of their husbands and of their fathers, and it comes up into play. And yeah, we see it here. Sarah, in some ways, is treated more like property.
Mhm.
And I think that we should be uncomfortable with that. I'm not gonna like, there's no way I can like massage it away to make it a comfortable feeling. She does get used in this story, and it does make her husband wealthy because of it.
well, we certainly wouldn't like it today, but on the other hand, if their culture said this is okay, women are brought up to accept the fact that they were property, I think. I don't think most of them gave it a thought. That was their, how they lived. I don't condone it exactly, but for them, this was okay.
The problem I see come up is when there are groups of people who think that everything that's in the Bible should be endorsed and carried on today. And that's where I see
Oh,
the
well, no.
like, it was okay at the time, so it's okay today kind of thing
No,
get
I don't
into
think
muddy
that.
territory. Because I remember like one of the things I talk about, the group that I didn't get along with, one of the things is they were trying to say that my father needed to give permission to any guy I dated, and I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. So
Mhm.
I am looking at the time, and I do want to respect our hard 11 o'clock stop. We're gonna keep talking about some of these dynamics because culture is gonna come up again and again, because this story gets messy, and it gets messy quick. For next time, before I pray us out, let's read 13 and 14 because it deals with, it deals with Lot's story. I want to keep Lot's story kind of together. So we're gonna talk about that just because they separate and they get back together. If we don't get to the whole thing, we can continue the next time. Does that sound good with 13 and 14?
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Next week is the week we have to skip though. So that will be in 2 weeks.
Okay.
All right. All right. So let us pray. God, we are the people who still hold on to this covenant that you made with Abraham. We see ourselves at least as the spiritual inheritors, at least in part. Even if we share this promise, we hold on to it because we want your blessing. We want to be blessed just like you blessed Abraham, but we know that requires something from us. It requires us to go into our communities and into our worlds and establish relationships and establish connections and friendships. And God, because we want to be blessed, we know that part of our responsibility is also to be a blessing where we go, with who we interact with, so that your impact and your touch may be felt throughout the world. And so help us both live into your blessing and help us live out that blessing that blesses everyone we are around. So we pray all these things in the name of Jesus, who continues to bless us with his story as well. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
See you in 2 weeks.
See you guys in 2 weeks.